On that late November night, the wind howled in from the Mississippi River, a mournful sound that snaked through the streets of Havenwood, Louisiana. The smell of damp earth mingled with the late-night smoke from a neighbor's barbecue pit. The tin roof of my diner occasionally popped and pinged, a restless rhythm that fed a nameless anxiety growing in my chest. My name is Sarah Jenkins. I'm 42, a widow for 8 years now. I make my living running a small diner and attached convenience store at the mouth of our alley. Next door is the auto repair shop belonging to John Peterson. He's a single man who raised 3 daughters from the time they were infants. Grace, the eldest, was quiet, but her thoughts ran deep. The middle child, Lily, was a spark plug, ready to ignite if anyone messed with her family. And then there was Annie, the youngest and smallest, always smiling, full of heart, and completely devoted to her father. For 15 years, I watched that family of 4 navigate every kind of hardship. I was the one who rushed Annie to the urgent care clinic when her fever spiked dangerously. I'd seen John on his front porch, fumbling to braid his daughter's hair, the pigtails coming out lopsided and crooked like a country road after a rainstorm. The girls would collapse in giggles, and John, with a perfectly straight face, would declare, "It doesn't matter if it's pretty. What matters is that Dad made the center part perfectly even. It's all about fairness." But about a month before that night, something about John began to change. His shop, which usually stayed open until 9:00 p.m., now had its metal security door rattling shut at 7:00 on the dot. Grace and Lily, coming home from their after-school activities, had to call him to come get them. When Annie came to my store to buy a soda, John would stand on his side of the property line, his eyes following her every move. One day, I teased him, "John, you'd think those girls were solid gold, the way you watch them. Afraid someone's going to snatch them away?" He didn't laugh. He just stared toward the end of the alley. "You can always find more gold, Sarah. If something happens to your kids, what can you trade to get them back?" When I pressed him, he just said he'd been tired lately and was going to bed early. But through the thin wall behind my kitchen, I'd hear his drawers opening and closing late at night. I'd hear the rustle of papers and the sound of his footsteps pacing back and forth in the back room he always kept locked. On the evening of November 28th, a cold, persistent drizzle started around 8 p.m. It wasn't a downpour, just a miserable, bone-chilling mist. Around 11, I had just stood up to lock the diner's front door when a loud bang echoed from John's house. It was followed by the crash of a chair, the clatter of metal rolling across the floor, and Annie's terrified scream. "Oh my God!" I ran out onto my porch. The door to John's house was shut tight, but the living room light was on. Before I could even shout, I heard Lily yell, "Let go of my dad!" A strange woman's voice, hoarse and urgent, shot back. "Get out of the way! Where's the key to the strongbox?" I sprinted across the driveway, pounding on their door. "John! Grace! Lily, Annie! What's wrong? Open the door, it's Sarah!" No one answered. All I heard was frantic breathing, a heavy thud, and then Grace sobbing. "Dad, stop struggling. You're bleeding." I called John's cell. I could hear it ringing inside, but no one picked up. I tried Grace, then Lily, then Annie. All 4 phones rang at once, a chorus of unanswered cries for help trapped behind a steel door. I dropped to my knees and peered through the mail slot. A dark red trickle was slowly creeping across the tile, heading for the front step. I reached a finger through, touching it. It was warm and slick. Blood. The woman's voice rang out again from inside. "Give me the key, or I'll let this whole family know what you've been hiding for 15 years. Then came the sound of something heavy being dragged across the floor. I heard Annie let out a weak moan and then silence. I was shaking so badly I misdialed twice before I managed to call 911. I'm in the Havenwood district, at John Peterson's house. I hear fighting, someone's hurt, there's blood coming from under the door. The door is locked and no one is answering. I think someone's being held hostage. The dispatcher asked if I'd heard any weapons. I didn't know. I just heard a woman demanding a key to a strongbox. There are 3 girls in there. Please. You have to hurry. Less than 10 minutes later, the flashing lights of a police cruiser and an ambulance sliced through the rainy darkness. A few neighbors' lights flicked on, and I saw someone filming from a distance with their phone. I pointed at the streak of blood and recounted everything I'd heard. An officer knocked loudly, identified himself, and ordered the person inside to open the door. When there was no response, a paramedic knelt, looked at the blood, and said, "Someone's losing blood. We can't wait." The police used a tool to break the lock. The metallic snap was like a gunshot in the night. The moment the door swung open, everyone standing nearby froze. John was tied to a chair in the middle of the room. His head was slumped to one side, blood trickling from his temple down his collar. His wrists were bound tightly with wire, the skin torn and raw. Grace was kneeling beside him, her face ashen, holding a bloody kitchen knife. "I was just cutting the wires," she whispered, her voice trembling. "I didn't hurt him." Lily was pinning a woman in a black raincoat to the floor. Her hair was matted to her forehead, and her arm was scratched, but she was gritting her teeth. "She hit my dad. She injected Annie with something." A few feet away, Annie lay unconscious next to an open metal strongbox. There was a red needle mark on her arm, and a used syringe lay on the floor nearby. John's cell phone was on the floor under a table, its screen shattered. The woman being restrained lifted her head and looked right at me. She was maybe in her late 50s, her face pale and drawn, but her eyes were full of defiance. "You people have no idea," she snarled. "He's the one who's been hiding the truth." Paramedics immediately rushed to John and Annie. The police took the knife from Grace and handcuffed the woman, ordering everyone else to step back. I stood by the doorway, my legs feeling like jelly. My gaze fell upon the open strongbox. There was no gold, no cash, no property deeds like the town gossips loved to imagine. There were only 3 faded plastic hospital bracelets, the kind they put on newborns, a stack of letters with no return address, a few old, water-stained documents, and a piece of carbon paper with 3 sequential codes, PA-27, PA-28, PA-29. At the very bottom lay a faded photograph. In it, a thin woman stood in front of my diner, clutching a cloth bag to her chest. Even in profile, I recognized her instantly. 6 years ago, I was the one who had stood in her way, who had blocked the entrance to the alley, and told her that John Peterson and his family didn't live here anymore. It wasn't until the old case files were reopened that I finally understood. The rainy, violent night I had just witnessed was only the tip of an iceberg, the culmination of a story that began 15 years earlier. In November of 2011, a hurricane slammed the Gulf Coast, and for days, the sky over southern Louisiana was a solid sheet of gray. The Mississippi River swelled, spilling over its levees, crawling through fields, and seeping into the streets until it was lapping at the doorsteps of many homes in Havenwood. Back then, John Peterson was 48, his parents were gone, and he lived alone in their old house, making a living as a mechanic, fixing cars, water pumps, and generators. He was a quiet man, but he had a reputation for being a miracle worker with machines. If there was a spark of life left in something, he wouldn't give up on it. Around 9 p.m. on the 17th of November, he was busy stacking his tools on high shelves to keep them out of the rising water when he got a call from the Havenwood Birthing Center. The caller's voice was frantic. "Is this John? Our generator won't start. We've got new mothers and infants in here, and the power just went out. You have to get over here, quick." John looked at the sheets of rain pounding his yard. "How high is the water over there?" "It's over our ankles already." The sump pump gave out too. He pulled on his rain gear and strapped his toolbox to his pickup truck. A neighbor saw him and tried to stop him. "Where are you going in this, John? The road by the small bridge is about to go under." John just pointed his chin in the direction of the center. "They've got newborns over there. If that generator doesn't run, it could get dangerous." The Havenwood Birthing Center was in a low-lying area near the river, about 4 miles from his house. By the time he arrived, the water in the parking lot was nearly halfway up his truck's tires. Staff were running back and forth, some carrying files, others moving oxygen tanks. The anxious calls of new mothers mixed with the drumming of rain on the metal roof. Dr. Richard Crane, the man who ran the facility, stood in the hallway, urging him on. "Please, fix it fast. We have patients who need monitoring and all the machines are dead." John knelt and opened the generator's housing. Water had already soaked some of the wiring, and the fuel filter was clogged. He told a staff member to help him hoist it onto a higher platform and asked for more flashlights. As people scattered, he heard a baby crying. At first, it was a tiny sound, almost lost in the storm. Then a second cry joined in, and a third, a desperate chorus as if they were trying to summon an adult. He looked up. Are there still babies in that last room? A midwife, clutching a stack of papers, froze. No, that room is empty. John's eyes went to the end of the hall. The door was closed, and water was already seeping under it. It's not empty. I hear them. That woman was Martha Gable. Her face went pale. Before she could answer, Dr. Crane stepped forward from behind her. You worry about the machine. We'll handle our professional duties. John didn't argue, but then the three cries erupted again, so clearly this time that everyone standing there could hear them. He set his wrench down and walked straight toward the final room. Martha Gable ran after him, grabbing his sleeve. You can't go in there. It hasn't been sterilized. He shook her hand off. There are babies crying in a flooded room. What's there to sterilize? The door was latched from the outside. He slid the bolt and pushed. The room was pitch black, lit only by flashes of lightning. In the center was a low metal bassinet, where three newborn girls, wrapped in thin blankets, lay side by side. The water was already touching the legs of the bassinet. Every time someone moved in the hallway, the water rippled, making the small bed rock. John clicked on his flashlight and leaned over them. All three were still breathing, but one was crying weakly, her lips starting to turn blue. On their wrists were three plastic bracelets. The mothers' names were different, but the patient ID codes were nearly sequential. John didn't know anything about medical procedures, but he'd worked with serial numbers his whole life and knew what a consecutive sequence looked like. He was about to call for help when he heard arguing from the hallway. Martha Gable was speaking in a hushed, urgent tone. The doctor told me to separate the files, but with three sequential codes like this, anyone who checks will know. And they were all born from the same mother. How are we supposed to match them to three different patient files? Dr. Crane's voice was sharp. You just do your part. If we can get them out of here by morning, no one will ask. But what if the mother wakes up and wants to see her babies? I've handled it. Stop asking questions. John stood frozen in the darkness. Before he could step out, a series of pops and sparks erupted from the electrical panel. The entire hallway flashed brightly, and then plunged into darkness. Staff outside started shouting as water began pouring in through a back door. The bassinet rocked and floated away from its original spot. John immediately scooped up the baby on the end, wrapped her tightly in his jacket, and yelled, There are 3 babies in here! Get a gurney! No one came in. A voice from the hall screamed, The electrical panel is flooded! Get out! John placed the first baby on a high table near the door and went back for the second. As he bent down, the water was already halfway up his shins. The third baby's cries were growing weaker, her tiny hand clenched inside the wet blanket. Dr. Crane yelled from the hallway, You are not authorized to move those patients. John spun around. You want to leave them here to drown? They are patients of this facility. Then you should be trying to save them. He carried the second baby out and went back a third time. A piece of wood, knocked loose from a window by the floodwaters, slammed into the leg of the bassinet. He had to brace himself against the wall to stay upright. Martha Gable stood a few feet away, her hands shaking uncontrollably. He yelled at her, Get some dry towels. Staring at them isn't going to make them any warmer. She flinched and hurried off. When he carried the last baby out into the hall, the infant's lips were pale. He used 2 fingers to gently rub her back, listening to her wheezing breaths. He turned to a nurse. Call an ambulance right now. And call the sheriff's department. Nobody takes these 3 babies anywhere else. Dr. Crane's voice was a low growl. You're a mechanic. What right do you have to give orders here? John looked him straight in the eye. I have no right to give orders. But anyone who wants to take these babies while their paperwork is a mess is going to have to go through the police first. A young nursing aide quietly used a landline to call the county hospital. The facility's security guard ran to a nearby emergency call box to report the situation, as cell service was spotty. About half an hour later, an ambulance, driven by a man named Frank Miller, arrived. The roads were deeply flooded, and he'd had to take a longer, higher route. As he opened the back doors, he asked, How many you got? 3, all girls. Where are the parents? John glanced at Dr. Crane and then answered, It's unclear. Just get them to the hospital first. I'll ride with them. The 3 babies were placed in a temporary transport incubator, accompanied by a nurse. A police officer who was on night duty recorded the initial situation, taking down the names of the person handing them over and the person receiving them. John sat in the back, one hand steadying a small oxygen tank, the other holding the edge of a blanket to shield the infants' faces from the rain. At the county hospital, the on-duty staff admitted all 3. With multiple witnesses present, John Peterson signed the official paperwork in the section marked Individual who discovered and assisted in transporting minors for emergency care. He didn't take a single one of them home. The next morning, as the floodwaters began to recede, Dr. Crane filed an official report. He claimed that the 3 baby girls were abandoned during the chaos of the storm, that their mothers could not be identified, and that their birth records had been destroyed by the water. Martha Gable sat beside him, her head bowed. When asked to confirm the report, she held the pen for a long time. An official asked, "You were the one directly caring for these 3 infants, correct?" She answered softly, "Yes. Do you have any idea who their mother is?" She glanced at Dr. Crane. He said nothing, just tapped 2 fingers on the file in front of him. Finally, Martha Gable signed her name to the statement, confirming that the 3 infants were of unknown origin. John stood just outside the door and heard everything. He wanted to speak up about the argument he'd overheard, but he had no recording, no original files, and he didn't know the name of the mother Martha had mentioned. Before leaving the hospital, he stopped by the neonatal unit. The 3 baby girls lay side by side under a warming lamp. The smallest one's lips were pink again, her tiny hand unconsciously gripping a nurse's finger. An employee said to her colleague, "If no one claims them, they'll probably end up in the foster system. If they get adopted, they'll likely each go to a different family." John stood there for a very long time. The night before, he had saved 3 babies from the rising flood. But in that moment, what scared him most wasn't the water. It was the thought of those 3 tiny hands, which had just found each other in the world, being pulled apart by adults and sent in 3 different directions. After the hurricane, the 3 baby girls were not taken home by John Peterson, as the neighborhood gossip mill later claimed. They remained in the hospital for nearly 2 weeks, for respiratory monitoring, infection prevention, and to stabilize their weight. Once their health improved, all 3 were transferred to a temporary county foster care facility. John was only the man who had found and rescued them. He had no legal right to take them anywhere. Every time he visited, he had to sign in and wait in a reception area for a staff member to bring the babies out. He always brought 3 cans of formula, 3 yellow blankets, and a huge bag of diapers. It got to the point where a social worker asked him, "Are you planning on supplying the whole nursery? You buy so much." He scratched his head. "I don't know how much each one uses. I'd rather have too much than too little. They can use the extra for the other kids." The authorities put out notices seeking information about the infants and tried to verify the records from the Havenwood Birthing Center and the county hospital. But weeks turned into months, and no one came forward with valid documentation to claim them. Dr. Crane stuck to his story that the triplets had been abandoned. The birthing center closed down shortly thereafter, citing extensive flood damage. Martha Gable disappeared, and no one knew what had happened to the patient files John had seen. Early the next year, John overheard a staff member say that if no relatives were found, the girls would likely be recommended for adoption to 3 separate families. He immediately asked, "Why can't they stay together?" The social worker sighed. "It's hard enough to find a family willing to adopt 1 infant, let alone 3 at once. Besides, there's no official paperwork confirming they're biological sisters." John fell silent for a moment, then said, "You can't prove they're sisters, but no one can prove they're not. They were in the same bassinet, their patient files had sequential numbers, and they were born at nearly the same time. If you separate them now and they find out later they're related, who's going to piece their childhoods back together for them?" When he applied to adopt all 3, many people told him it was a fantasy. A single man approaching 50, with no wife adopting 1 baby would be a challenge, let alone 3 girls. Even I asked him, "John, everyone knows you care about those girls, but raising kids takes more than just love. What happens when all 3 are crying at once, sick at once, growing up at once? Can you really handle it?" He looked at the empty room at the back of his house. "You don't know if you can handle a weight until you prepare yourself to lift it." To say you can't before you've even tried is like looking at a boat on the shore and declaring it will sink. From that day on, he began to transform his home. He sold nearly a third of the land his parents had left him, using the money to repair the roof, install new flooring, and add a second bedroom and a private bathroom. He put the rest of the money into a savings account as an emergency fund. He gathered his auto shop's financial records, invoices, and proof of income. He had a full physical, obtained a residency confirmation, passed a background check, and allowed social workers to inspect his home multiple times. A caseworker asked him, "You live alone. Who will watch the children when you're working?" He replied, "During the day, I work right here in the garage in front of the house. My sister, Mary, lives 2 miles away and can come help. Sarah, my neighbor, can also watch them in a pinch." At the time, I was 27 and still had my husband. We ran our breakfast diner and store, so we were home almost all day. When asked, I told the truth. I can't be a father to them like John can, but when the kids are sick or he has an emergency, my husband and I can lend a hand. John's sister, Mary, also agreed to help regularly. She even scolded him. "If you try to raise these kids like you fix cars, just patching things up as they break, I'm taking all 3 of them to my house." John just smiled. "You can replace broken parts on a car. If you break a child's spirit, what can you replace it with?" They grilled him on his reasons for wanting to adopt, scrutinizing his finances, his health, his living situation, his character, and his relationships with his neighbors. He had to explain why he was adamant about adopting all 3 instead of just 1. A caseworker asked him bluntly, "One child is exhausting. If you take on all 3, won't you regret it someday?" He sat up straight. "The only thing I'd regret is looking back on today and knowing I let someone split them up." During the entire waiting period, he wasn't allowed to bring the babies home for a trial run. He just visited regularly, bringing diapers and formula, learning how to hold them, and asking about each one's habits. The biggest baby was the healthiest and liked to look around with wide-open eyes. The second one had the loudest cry. If her bottle was a minute late, the whole nursery knew it. The smallest was weaker, ate slowly, and often needed to be burped for a long time. He started calling them by the names he had already chosen. "This one's so calm, I'll call her Grace. The one with the strong lungs can be Lily, give her some fire. And for the little one, I hope her life is peaceful, so I'll call her Annie." I laughed. "John, you're naming them like you've been raising them for 10 years already." He looked at the 3 tiny faces through the nursery glass. "I don't know if I'll get to be their dad, but at the very least, someone should call them by a proper name." More than 7 months passed. The public notices yielded no results. No other family met the qualifications and was willing to adopt all 3 girls at once. After numerous evaluations, the adoption was legally finalized in August of that year. When he signed the papers, John's hand was shaking so much that he messed up a letter. The clerk reminded him, "Think carefully, sir. Once you sign, this is a lifelong responsibility." He looked at the 3 babies in their carriers. "I've been thinking about it since the night the water was rising around their bassinet." That afternoon, the 3 babies were brought to the neighborhood for the first time, each wrapped in an identical blanket. People from up and down the street stood on their porches, some happy for him, some curious, and some shaking their heads, muttering that he was just bringing hardship on himself. John paid them no mind. He carried each baby across the threshold and placed them in 3 bassinets set up side by side. Then, he spoke to them seriously. "From now on, this is your home. Dad's not an expert, but Dad promises to learn." Not a minute later, Annie started to cry. Hearing her sister, Lily joined in. Grace, who had been sleeping peacefully, startled and added her voice to the chorus. John stood in the middle of the room, a bottle in one hand, a burp cloth in the other, sweat pouring down his face like he'd just finished a transmission job in the summer heat. I ran over, picking up one of the babies, and smiling. "Well, you promised to learn. You'd better learn fast. These 3 teachers don't give you a heads up before the pop quiz." John looked at the 3 wailing infants, flustered and red-faced. But in his eyes, there wasn't a trace of regret. There was only the fear that he wasn't good enough, and a joy so immense it seemed the small house could barely contain it. In those first few weeks after the babies came home, the concept of day and night ceased to exist in John's house. Just as Grace would fall asleep, Lily would start crying. The moment Lily quieted down, Annie would spit up her formula. Some nights, all three would be fussy at once. John would hold one against his chest, prop another up with pillows beside him, and use his foot to rock the third bassinet. Standing at my door, looking in, I didn't know whether to laugh or cry for him. "Are you raising children or performing a circus act, John?" I asked. He was drenched in sweat but managed to keep his voice steady. "Don't just stand there making commentary. Get in here and help me figure out which one is crying because she's hungry and which one is crying in solidarity with her sister." I picked up Annie. She was the smallest, light as a feather, her tiny hands clutching my shirt collar. "This one's crying because her diaper is wet." John looked at the other two. "So the other two are crying out of team spirit. Raising one infant is enough to make your head spin. Raising three of the same age meant everything was multiplied by 3 bottles, bath towels, medicine, and sleepless nights." John bought a school notebook and divided it into 3 sections. The first few pages tracked Grace's feeding times. The middle was for Lily, and the last was for Annie. He meticulously recorded every fever, every dose of medicine, every diaper change. Once, I saw him write, "Lily cried for a long time, probably angry because she was fed after her sister." I laughed out loud. "She's only a few months old and you can already tell she's angry?" John answered seriously, "That one cries for a reason. If she's not happy, she looks you right in the eye before she lets out a wail." And Lily did grow up to have that exact personality. Before she could even walk steadily, she knew how to stand her ground to protect her sisters. If a stranger leaned down to touch Annie, Lily would immediately slap their hand away, babbling what sounded like a stern warning. Grace was different. She rarely cried, her wide eyes always observing everything around her. When she learned to share toys, she would usually give the better ones to her sisters and keep the chipped or broken one for herself. I once told her, "If you keep giving everything away, what will be left for you?" Grace, only 4 years old at the time, thought for a moment and replied, "What's left for me is that my sisters aren't crying." Annie was more fragile than her 2 sisters. She was prone to throat infections and would get wheezy whenever the weather changed. On nights when I heard her cough, John would be up and out of bed even before I, in the house next door, had registered the sound. One night, all 3 of them had high fevers. John held Grace against his chest, I carried Annie, and my husband at the time piggybacked Lily as we ran to the 2 4-hour clinic. Lily's face was flushed red from the fever, but she kept looking back over her shoulder. "Is Dad coming?" John, running right behind them, called out, "I'm right here. Face forward so you don't catch a chill." Though exhausted, the little girl managed to say, "Don't lose Grace." My husband had to chuckle. If your dad lost one of you, the other 2 would scream loud enough for the whole town to know. After that night, John built a new medicine cabinet, labeling each shelf with one of the girls' names. He had no medical training, but he never gave them medicine without consulting a professional first. Every time he bought something from the pharmacy, he would ask the pharmacist detailed questions and write the dosage instructions on a piece of paper. During the day, he set up his workbench right by the front door of the garage. Regular customers knew he had small children inside and never wandered into the house. If a stranger came by, he would always stand in the entryway, blocking the path inside, before asking what they needed. Someone once joked, "You guard your kids more carefully than a bank vault." John, tightening a bolt, replied without looking up, "If you lose what's in a vault, you call the police to find it. If someone hurts your kids, even if you find them again, they might not be the same." Time passed, measured by the sound of engines revving in the driveway and the murmur of children reciting their lessons inside. Mornings were another daily battle. 3 girls needed 3 sets of clothes, 3 pairs of shoes, 3 backpacks, and 3 different hairstyles. John could disassemble a car engine with his eyes closed, but he was defeated by a handful of hair ties. One day, he braided Grace's hair with 1 pigtail high and 1 low. Lily looked in the mirror and asked, "Dad, what kind of style is that?" "Grace's head looks like a mountain road." John answered with a straight face, "It's the new trend." I couldn't help but chime in from my porch. "A trend where?" "In this house," he said, "1 person does it, 3 people wear it. That's enough to be a trend." The 3 girls burst out laughing. Grace, ever the good sport, went to school with her lopsided hair, but came home that afternoon having taught herself how to braid for her two sisters. From then on, John was relieved of a duty he called more difficult than tuning a carburetor. His house wasn't wealthy, but he never let the girls go without what they needed for school. One year, business was slow right before Christmas, and he didn't have enough money for 3 new outfits. He worked on cars past midnight, his hands chapped from grease and cold water. I brought him a bowl of soup. "Their old clothes are fine, John. Why are you torturing yourself?" He ate as he spoke. "They're fine to wear, but kids see their friends with new things, and it makes them sad. I can't give them more than other kids, but at least I don't want them to feel like they have less." For Halloween, he turned 3 empty formula cans into lanterns. He punched star-shaped holes in them, attached wire handles, and placed candles inside. The 3 lanterns weren't as fancy as the ones in the stores, but Grace, Lily, and Annie carried them proudly all over the neighborhood. When someone asked, "Where did you buy those lanterns?" Lily puffed out her chest. "They're not for sale. They're a custom design by my dad." Some people in the neighborhood were supportive, but others whispered. They said a single man raising 3 daughters would face awkward situations someday. Some even deliberately asked in front of the children, "Out of the 3 of you, which one is John's times real times daughter?" John, who was patching a tire, heard this and immediately set his tools down. "All of my daughters are real. I'm not raising any of them on paper." The person gave a forced laugh. "I mean, which one is your biological child?" John looked them straight in the eye. "Biology is about origins. But every day that they hurt and I stay up, that they're hungry and I provide, that they're happy and I celebrate after all those years, if you still have to ask if it's real or fake, then your question is the only fake thing here." After that, no one dared to ask that kind of question in front of the girls again. I used to think John was as solid as a rock. Then, when I was 34, my husband was killed in a car accident while making a delivery. For a time, I could barely get out of bed. It was John who closed his shop for 2 days to help with the funeral arrangements. Grace and Annie took turns bringing me meals, while Lily sat watch at my store, jotting down what people bought on a piece of cardboard. When a customer underpaid, Lily stood with her hands on her hips and said, "Sir, you bought 2 bags of chips but only paid for 1. Sarah is grieving, but her store isn't a charity." Hearing that, I laughed for the first time in days. After the funeral, the awning over my diner started to leak. John climbed up to fix it while the 3 girls stood below, handing him nails. He never told me to be strong or that time heals all wounds. He just said, "You go ahead and grieve. Leave the heavy lifting to me. Stand up when you're ready. No one's rushing you." From that day forward, I considered his family my own. I thought I knew all their habits, that Grace hated raw onions, that Lily loved the crispy rice at the bottom of the pot, and that Annie would grab her pillow and run to her dad's room during a thunderstorm. I thought there were no secrets in the house next door. But in late 2018, John received a plain envelope with no return address. That day, I was cleaning vegetables out front when I saw him standing by his mailbox for a long time. His expression didn't change, but his hand clenched the envelope so tightly that the edges crumpled. "What is it, John?" I asked. "You look like you just got a bill from the IRS." He folded the letter. "It's nothing, sent to the wrong address." That night, through the kitchen wall, I heard the lock on the back room click open. John was in there for nearly an hour. A few days later, he installed a new, heavier lock and told the girls they were never to enter that room without his permission. Much later, I learned what was in that envelope. It was a single sentence. "You saved 3 children, but don't think for a second they truly belong to you." From that day on, the house was still filled with the sounds of "Dad," arguments over snacks, and laughter at the dinner table. But behind it all, there was now a closed door that not even his 3 daughters were allowed to open. In August of 2026, Havenwood was coming out of a long heat wave. At noon, the asphalt shimmered, radiating heat up to the porch awnings. In the evenings, the river breeze brought the smell of damp soil. It was around this time that Annie began to experience strange spells of fatigue. At first, she would just pause, holding onto the banister after climbing the stairs. She'd laugh it off, saying she probably hadn't eaten enough for breakfast. But one day, during gym class, her heart started pounding so hard that her vision went black. The teacher had to help her sit down and call John to pick her up. Annie tried to smile. Sarah, don't look at me like I'm on my deathbed. The doctor just said I need some more tests. John wasn't smiling. His hand was gripping a folder of medical papers. What did the doctor say? I asked. Is she just not getting enough sleep? Annie looked at her father and said in a small voice, the doctor asked if anyone in our family ever had heart problems or died suddenly at a young age. Dad couldn't answer. That question silenced John completely. A few days later, he took Annie to a specialist in New Orleans. The initial results weren't critical, but the doctor suspected she had a heart arrhythmia and ordered more tests, emphasizing the need for a family medical history from her biological parents. That night, the three sisters sat around the dinner table. Lily put a piece of fish on her sister's plate. Whatever tests the doctor needs, we'll do them. You don't even have a diagnosis yet, and you're moping like you lost your lottery ticket. Annie held her fork but didn't eat. I'm not scared of the tests. I'm scared they're going to ask questions that no one in our family can answer. Grace, who was pouring gravy, paused. Dad, do you still have our records from when we were born? There are a few things. Can we see them? There's nothing worth seeing. Most of the papers from that year were ruined by the flood. A week later, while working on a school project about her family history, Grace was looking through an old medical file and discovered the three sequential patient ID numbers, PA27, PA28, and PA29. The strange thing was, the mother's name listed on each sheet was different. Grace laid the 3 pages in front of her father. Can you explain this to me? John looked at the numbers, and his face changed. Those are old papers. Someone probably made a mistake. I could believe one mistake, Grace said, her voice steady. But 3 sequential codes, born at nearly the same time, with 3 different mothers' names? What kind of mistake is that perfect? Lily chimed in. Take it easy on him, Grace. He didn't make the files, how would he know? Grace's eyes never left her father's face. I'm not saying Dad made them. I'm just asking why he won't tell us what he knows. John closed the file. This conversation is over. Annie wrung her hands. Dad, I just need to know the family medical history. I'm not trying to leave home and find anyone. John looked at his youngest daughter, his eyes a mixture of love and fear. I'll talk to the doctor. You girls don't need to dig up the past. Grace refused to back down. But Annie's health is a problem right now. It's not the past. John slammed his hand on the table. It wasn't hard enough to make the dishes rattle, but it was enough to make all 3 girls jump. I said, drop it. Lily sided with her father. Grace, stop. If Dad isn't talking, he must have a reason. Grace shot back. What reason could be more important than the truth? Annie burst into tears. Please, stop fighting. I don't want my health to tear this family apart. John took the file, walked straight to the back room, and locked the door behind him. From that day on, the atmosphere in the house grew heavy. Lily started noticing a woman who often stood across the street. The woman wore a motorcycle helmet that obscured her face. Sometimes she would pretend to be buying a drink from the corner store. Other times she would just sit on her scooter, staring at their house. One afternoon, Lily ran into my diner. Sarah, do you see that woman in the gray jacket over there? I looked, but the woman had already started her scooter and driven away, probably just a customer waiting for someone. What kind of customer stands in the exact same spot for 3 days straight, staring at our house? I tried to ease her worry. You have 3 pretty girls in your house. It's not strange that people look. Could you talk to my dad for me? She asked. He's hiding everything from us lately. Before I got the chance, John tightened his grip on everything. Starting in early October, he closed the shop at 7 p.m. sharp. Grace and Lily had to call him to pick them up from their study groups. When Annie came to my store to buy shampoo, John stood in his doorway, waiting. I teased him. You'd think those girls were solid gold, the way you watch them. He looked toward the end of the alley. You can always find more gold. If something happens to your kids, what can you trade to get them back? He started checking the locks constantly. One night, around 1 a.m., I heard the sound of his printer running, paper being stapled into packets, and his footsteps pacing in the back room. The next morning, I asked him about it. He just said, I'm not sleeping well these days. Not sleeping well? But you told the whole neighborhood you're going to bed early. He forced a smile. Old people lie. Is getting some sleep a crime now? His smile was so strained that I didn't want to ask any more questions. The three girls only saw their father becoming stricter. They didn't know that since late September, he had received 2 more plain envelopes. One contained a photo of Annie in front of her school. The other had the license plate number of the car Grace usually took to her study group. He didn't tell anyone. He photocopied old documents, saved strange phone numbers, wrote down license plates, and locked everything in the metal strongbox. Perhaps he thought that silence would keep them safe. But as the old saying goes, sometimes silence doesn't make a problem disappear. It just gives it more time to grow. One evening, Grace asked her father again, "Are we a family?" "Of course." "Then why does our family have a room that no one is allowed to enter, a file that no one is allowed to see, and a fear that you refuse to name?" John tightened his grip on a screwdriver. "I do it to protect you." Grace shook her head. "You say we're a family, but what kind of family is it where 3 daughters have to guess what their own father is hiding from them?" John didn't answer. He just turned away. The next morning, when he opened the shop, he found a folded piece of paper shoved under the door. No sender, no phone number, just a single line written in black ink. "If you want to know if their mother is dead or alive, open the strongbox." John's face went white as he read it. He crumpled the paper, but not before realizing Annie was standing right behind him. Annie saw the single line of text just before John crumpled the paper in his fist. Standing behind her father, the ceramic mug in her hand, her lips went pale. "Dad, is my mother really alive?" John spun around, his face not one of confusion, but of the sheer terror of someone who knew too much and didn't dare to speak. "It's nothing, Annie. Just some cruel prank." "Let me see it," Annie said, reaching for his hand. He shoved the paper deep into his pocket. "I told you, it's nothing." "If it's nothing, why is your face as white as a ghost?" Grace emerged from the house, with Lily right behind her, tying her hair back. "What's going on now?" Annie turned to her sisters. "Someone left a note. It said if we want to know if our mother is dead or alive, we have to open the strongbox." Lily looked from her dad to the locked room at the back of the house. Grace spoke slowly. "Dad, open that room and let us see." "No." "Why not?" "Because I said so." Lily, who usually defended her father, now frowned. "Dad, at least tell us who's threatening our family." John's voice was sharp. "You 3 worry about school. I'll handle this." Annie burst into tears. "I have a health problem and I'm not even allowed to know if my own mother is alive or dead? And you tell me to be calm?" John reached for her, but Annie took a step back. The distance between them was less than an arm's length, but from my diner next door, it looked like a chasm had just split the ground between father and daughter. That afternoon, Lily searched for the spare key in John's toolbox. She later told me she just wanted to open the room, take a picture of anything related to her and her sisters, and put the key right back. But the moment she inserted it into the lock, John walked in. Lily turned. "Dad, let me explain." He snatched the key from her hand. "Who gave you permission to touch this?" "I just want to know what's happening to our family." "I forbid it." "You keep forbidding things, but you won't tell us anything." John slammed the keychain down on a table. "You will not enter this room without my permission." Then he went a step further. "And from now on, the front door stays locked too. No one is going anywhere." Grace ran out from her room. "What are you talking about? That's like locking us up." "I'm protecting you." Grace looked him straight in the eye. "Protecting someone without telling them what the danger is? Is that protection? Or is that control?" John was speechless. Lily's eyes welled up with tears. "I thought, in this family, you at least trusted us." He took the keys and went into the back room, slamming the door shut. That night, no one finished their dinner. I could hear the muffled sounds of arguments from next door. The next morning, Brenda, a regular, sat down at my counter. "What's all the drama at John's place? Sounded like a war zone over there last night." I was pouring coffee, my mind still on the 3 girls, and I spoke without thinking. "It's probably about their old paperwork. There's been a stranger watching the house, and John locked up the back room and won't say why." Brenda leaned in, lowering her voice. "Maybe he's hiding something about their real parents." I shook my head. "I didn't say that. I just see that the girls are confused." I should have stopped there, but in our small town, a story could be seasoned and served before the coffee pot was empty. By noon, The story had twisted into John is hiding documents to stop his daughters from finding their birth family. By afternoon, people were saying he was afraid the girls would leave him if they found their real parents. That evening, a message appeared in the neighborhood's online chat group. That mechanic raised 3 daughters just so he'd have free labor for his shop and someone to take care of him in his old age. Someone else added, "Raising someone else's kids for 15 years and then acting like you own them gives me the creeps." I immediately typed back, "Everyone, please stop speculating. I never said John was locking them up or taking advantage of them." Someone replied, "Where there's smoke, there's fire." It's the kind of phrase people think sounds wise, but often, the mouths of gossips are the ones carrying the torch, looking for something to set ablaze. The next afternoon, Lily walked into my diner and put her phone on the counter. The screen showed the chat thread that was spreading through town. "Did you tell people about our family's problems?" I stammered, "I just said a stranger was watching the house and your dad was hiding papers, and that you girls were worried. I never said all those other things." Lily gave a bitter smile. "You said half, and then you let other people make up the other half. I was just worried about you girls. People who hurt others always like to call their curiosity concern." I tried to defend myself. "I've been your neighbor for 15 years. Don't I have the right to ask? Living next door doesn't give you the right to walk into our family's business through the mouths of other people." Grace stood in the doorway, her voice cold but still polite. "From now on, Sarah, please don't say anything else about our family, whether it's true or false." Annie was last, her eyes full of sadness. She was holding the blue ceramic mug she always kept at my diner. I had just washed it and put it on the shelf. I asked her, "Annie, why are you taking the mug?" "We can use it at our house," she said quietly. She didn't scold me, but that polite distance stung more than any angry words. The 3 of them left. From that day on, my diner was quiet. No more Lily complaining about the chili, no more Grace doing her homework in the corner booth, no more Annie running over to ask for a glass of warm milk. I used to think that if my intentions were good, my words didn't matter. But I learned that a family's dignity is like a pane of glass. An outsider can say one careless thing, and the crack can spread further than you can imagine, leaving the people inside to pick up the pieces. Across the street, the woman in the helmet stood by a snow cone stand, pretending to look at her phone, her eyes fixed on John's house. Later, reviewing my security footage, I realized she had watched the entire confrontation between Lily and me. She understood that the 3 sisters had just lost the one adult outside their family they used to confide in, and she knew that of the 3 girls, Annie was the most vulnerable. That evening, as Annie sat alone by her window, her phone buzzed. A private message from an unknown account. It was a photo of a young, pregnant woman with a single line of text. "I helped deliver you. I know your mother's name." Annie stared at the message for a long time. Then she locked her bedroom door before typing her reply. "Who are you?" The message arrived long after the house had gone dark. Annie sat on her bed, hugging her knees, staring at the photo of the young pregnant woman until her eyes ached. The woman in the picture was thin, with pale skin, but her smile was gentle. One hand rested on her belly, the other held a small cloth embroidered with 3 tiny flowers. Annie typed, "Who are you?" The reply was almost instantaneous. "My name is Martha Gable. 15 years ago, I was a midwife at the Havenwood Birthing Center." The next message was a photo of an old birth record. A faded circular stamp from the center was visible in the corner. Next to it was the name Laura Hayes. The date matched the time when the 3 sisters were found. Annie wasn't immediately convinced. She took a screenshot, zoomed in on the details, and compared them to the old papers she'd seen in her father's files. The similarities were frighteningly accurate. The next day, Annie messaged her, "If you knew this, why didn't you try to find us for 15 years? Martha replied, "Because I was a coward. I was afraid of what people would do to me, afraid of losing my job, afraid of taking responsibility. But I can't stay silent anymore. We can't talk about this over the phone. I have documents I can't send. Pick a public place and I'll come alone." Annie thought about it for 2 days before agreeing to meet at a coffee shop near the bus station. She didn't tell her father. She just texted Grace that she was going to the bookstore. The lie weighed on her the whole way there. Martha Gable was sitting at a table near the exit. In person, she looked much older than her profile picture, with a with dark circles under her eyes, her hands nervously rubbing the strap of her purse. Annie didn't sit down right away. "Show me your ID." Martha seemed surprised but reached into her purse and produced her driver's license. "You're right to be careful." Annie took a picture of the ID before pulling out a chair. "What do you know about my mother?" Martha placed a real photograph on the table. On the back, written in blue ink, it said, "Laura, 8 months pregnant." Her name was Laura Hayes. She was 24, worked as a seamstress. That day, she gave birth to 3 baby girls. Annie held her breath. 3. From the same mother? Yes. Then why do the records show 3 different names? Because Dr. Crane made me change them. And I did what he said. Annie looked her straight in the eye. "So you didn't save my mother and me. You helped them hide us." Martha lowered her head. "You're right. I'm not asking for your pity. I just want to tell the rest of the truth before it's erased completely. Where is my mother?" Laura was led to believe all 3 of her babies had died. "It was years later that she found out you might still be alive. Did she ever look for us?" "She did. And your father, John, knows about it." Annie shot to her feet. "You're lying. He has her letters, photos, and papers locked in that metal strongbox." "Why do you think he keeps that room locked?" "My dad is not the person you're describing. I'm not saying he doesn't love you, but the more a person is afraid of losing something, the easier it is for them to hide it from others." Annie turned to leave. Martha pushed an old nursing chart across the table. "You have a birthmark on your back, near your left shoulder blade, about the size of your fingertip. I noted it on this chart." Annie froze. The birthmark was in a place that was hard to see. Besides her family and her doctor, few people knew about it. Martha lowered her voice. "I don't need you to believe me right away. Just check for yourself." Annie sat back down. "What do you want?" "I want to see the documents in the strongbox." "Just to see them? Why not go to the police?" "My signature is on the falsified records. Dr. Crane has the originals. Without proof, he'll just say I'm making things up to save myself. Then you should definitely go to the police. In that strongbox, there's a piece of carbon paper with the 3 sequential codes. If I can just get a picture of it, I can prove the 3 files were all from the same birth." Annie frowned. "You're asking a kid to steal from her own father. I'm just asking you to open something that is directly about your own life." Martha studied Annie's face and added the final lure. "It also has papers with your maternal family's medical history. Your mother once told me a relative died young from a heart condition. You need that information, don't you?" Annie's hands clenched. "How did you know I've been to a doctor?" "I've been watching you because I was afraid something might happen, like what happened to your relatives." The first half of the sentence was true, the second was bait. But in that moment, all Annie heard was the possibility that the strongbox held the key to helping her doctors understand her heart. Martha took out a faded envelope. "This is the last letter your mother wrote. When you let me see the papers in the box, I'll give it to you. How do I know this is really her handwriting?" "You'll know when you read it." Annie left the coffee shop in a daze. She had planned to tell Grace, but that evening, the moment she mentioned the old files, John immediately snapped. "I told you, no one is to bring up that subject again." Annie stood in the middle of the living room. "Even if it's related to my health? I'll take care of it." "How? By locking the door?" John turned away. Lily saw her sister's red eyes and asked, "Did someone do something to you, Annie?" Annie almost said Martha's name, but looking at the house keys hanging from her sister's necks, she swallowed her words. In the following days, Martha didn't pressure her. She just sent small bits of information: the name of the garment factory where Laura worked, the sour soup she craved during her pregnancy, a lullaby she sang that mentioned 3 flowers by the river. That patient approach was what made her so dangerous. It made Annie feel like she was being respected. A week later, Annie messaged her. "If I help you, you won't take anything." "No, I'll just photograph one document. You can't go into any other rooms. I promise. And you have to give me my mother's letter first." "Deal." Martha chose a night when Grace and Lily had a study group. At the same time, a man called John, using the name of a regular customer, and reported that his truck had broken down 5 miles out of town. Martha texted, 3 knocks. Only open when you hear exactly 3. At 9:20 p.m., there it was. Knock, knock, knock. Annie stood in the living room, phone in one hand, the other on the deadbolt. She told herself she would just get her mother's letter, let Martha see one piece of paper, and it would all be over. But the moment the door cracked open, the woman outside wasn't looking at Annie. Her gaze was fixed over Annie's shoulder, toward the locked room at the end of the hall. The third knock echoed, and Annie slid the deadbolt. Martha Gable stood on the porch in a dark raincoat, water dripping from the brim of her hood. Annie opened the door just a crack. The letter. Martha held up the faded envelope. "Let me in. People will see me out here." The letter first. Reluctantly, Martha placed the envelope in Annie's hand. As the girl looked down at it, Martha slipped through the opening. "What are you doing?" "Just getting out of the rain." Martha took off her coat, her eyes locked on the room at the end of the hall. Annie immediately blocked her path. "You sit right here. I'll get the paper and show it to you. I need to see the original to know if it's real. You promised you'd only look at one page." "And I will." A chill went down Annie's spine. She moved toward the front door. "We're done for tonight. You should go." Martha's expression hardened instantly. "You opened the door. Now you're kicking me out? This is my house. And that strongbox holds the key to your life. Don't you want to know what he's been hiding?" She strode quickly toward the back room. Annie ran after her, spreading her arms to block the door. "You can't go in there." Martha opened her purse. She pulled out not a letter, but a thin, flat piece of metal and a small pair of pliers. Annie was horrified. "You lied to me. I don't have time to explain. Get out of my house right now, or I'm calling the police." As Annie raised her phone, Martha grabbed her wrist. They struggled, and the envelope fell to the floor. "Let me go. Stay still and no one gets hurt." At that exact moment, John was driving his truck through the rain to the supposed breakdown 5 miles away. The caller had claimed to be the nephew of an old customer, recited the correct license plate of a truck John had worked on, and promised to pay triple his usual rate. But when he arrived, all he found was an empty lot, the grass knee-high. He tried calling the number back, but it was disconnected. He immediately turned the truck around and sped home. Back at the house, Martha was forcing the metal pick into the lock. Annie held onto the doorknob, crying, "Don't touch my dad's things. Your dad is holding on to something that doesn't belong to him. Whatever it is, it doesn't belong to you either." Martha's voice was a low snarl. "The dead are at peace. The living have to know how to survive. If you want to confess, go to the police. Don't come here with pliers to break into someone's house." She hesitated for a second, then went back to working the lock. Just then, the front door burst open. John stood there, his raincoat dripping. The moment he saw Martha, he growled her name. "Martha Gable." She spun around. "So you remember me? The woman who signed 3 fake birth certificates?" Hard to forget. Annie stared at her father, stunned. "Dad, you know her?" John pulled out his phone. "Drop it. I'm calling the cops." Martha lunged. The metal tool in her hand struck John across the temple. There was a sickening thud. John staggered, slamming his shoulder into the wall, his phone clattering to the floor. "Dad!" Annie screamed. Martha kicked the phone under a table and struck John's arm. He managed to grab her wrist, yelling, "Annie, get out!" The girl turned to run, but Martha grabbed her by the hair, pulling her back. John rushed forward but was dizzy, blood streaming from his temple. Martha pulled a coil of wire from her bag, forced him into a chair, and twisted his arms behind his back, binding his wrists. The more he struggled, the deeper the wire cut into his skin. "Where is the key to the strongbox? Even if you get the papers, you can't erase what you did." "Shut up!" Annie grabbed a vase to try and help him. Martha wrestled it from her, shoving her into a cabinet. "Where does he keep the key?" "I don't know." Annie scrambled for the front door again. Martha blocked her, pulling a syringe from her pocket. Annie backed away in terror. "What are you doing?" "Just helping you get some sleep." "No, stay away!" Annie fought back, scratching Martha's hand, but the woman was stronger. She pinned Annie's arm, plunged the needle into the soft skin above her elbow, and pushed the plunger. John roared. "What did you inject her with?" "A sedative. She'll be fine." "She has a heart condition." Martha froze. Annie stumbled, her hand clutching the edge of a table. She tried to call out for her dad, but her voice was already slurring. Then she collapsed next to the metal strongbox. At that exact moment, the front door opened again. Grace and Lily ran in. Their study group had been canceled due to a power outage, so they came home early. The second Lily saw her sister on the floor, she dropped her backpack and charged at Martha. "What did you do to my sister?" She tackled the woman, wrestling her to the ground and using her knees to pin the arm that was reaching for the metal tool. Grace dropped to her knees beside Annie. "Annie, can you hear me?" John, his voice strained, gasped. "Grace, cut the wires. Call 911. Grace ran to the kitchen and came back with a knife. Her hands were shaking as she tried to slip the blade under the wire. "Dad, hold still. I'll be careful." The wire was too tight. As John moved, the blade slipped, grazing his already bloody wrist. Grace started to sob. "Dad, stop struggling. You're bleeding." Across the room, Martha suddenly jabbed her elbow into Lily's chest, freeing one arm and lunging for the strongbox. Lily grabbed her shirt, pulling her back. They slammed into a shelf, and the strongbox tumbled to the floor. The lock, already damaged from Martha's picking, broke open. 3 plastic newborn bracelets, a stack of old letters, and the photo of the pregnant woman spilled out. Martha saw the carbon paper with the 3 sequential codes and snatched at it. Lily tackled her again. "Grace, get the paper." Grace was still holding the knife. Her father was covered in blood. Annie was unconscious next to the syringe. In the chaos, no one heard me pounding on the door outside. Not until the trickle of blood from John's wrist seeped under the door and I saw it. That was when the wail of sirens finally cut through the rainy night. The door burst open, and a flashlight beam swept across the scene, finally landing on the bloody knife in Grace Peterson's hand. She dropped it, her voice breaking. I wasn't hurting him. I was trying to save him. The moment the door flew open, 2 police officers moved swiftly to separate everyone. One officer subdued Martha Gable, while the other gently took Grace's arm, helping her up and carefully taking the knife from her hand. Lily was still on the floor, her hands trembling from the adrenaline. A paramedic checked on Annie and immediately called out, "Pulse is weak, get the stretcher." John, struggling to lift his head, rasped, "Save her first. She has a heart condition." Blood from his temple matted his hair and stained his collar. His wrists were raw and torn by the wire. Grace looked at the faces of the neighbors peering in and said frantically, "I was just cutting the wires for my dad. I didn't stab him." An officer reassured her. "No one is jumping to any conclusions right now. Please step back and let us secure the scene." Martha immediately started yelling. "She attacked him with that knife. And that other one assaulted me for no reason. This whole family is hiding forged documents to cover up what they did years ago." Lily shot back. "You're the one who hit my dad and drugged my sister?" "Everyone, be quiet," the lead officer commanded. "You will each give your statements separately. There will be no arguing at the scene." Annie was carried out on the stretcher first, with John following on a second one. As they passed, Grace ran forward a few steps. "Is my dad going to be okay?" A paramedic replied, "We're taking care of him. Just tell the officers exactly what happened." I was also questioned about what I had heard. I recounted the woman's voice demanding a key, Grace's voice saying she was cutting the wires, and the blood seeping under the door. Detective Miller instructed me, "Ma'am, please preserve the footage from your security camera. Don't delete it, don't copy it, and don't send it to anyone." As I turned, I saw a young delivery driver sheltering under the awning across the street, his phone pointed at the house. I snapped, "There are injured minors in there. Don't you dare post that online." He looked flustered. "I wasn't going to, ma'am." But the next morning, the video was everywhere. It was only 12 seconds long. 12 seconds that showed Grace holding a bloody knife, John tied to a chair, Lily pinning Martha to the floor, and Annie unconscious next to the strongbox. The headline was cold and brutal. Adopted daughters violently assault father in robbery attempt. No one saw the footage of Martha picking the lock. No one saw John being struck. No one saw the needle go into Annie's arm. People saw the ending and wrote their own beginning. "You raise a viper in your own home," one comment read. "Poor John worked his whole life, and this is the thanks he gets from his adopted kids." I fired back in the comments. "No one has concluded she stabbed him. Stop spreading lies." Someone replied sarcastically, "Why are you defending the obvious?" The obvious was just a few seconds, with no beginning and no end. At the hospital, doctors determined that John had no stab or slash wounds. The injury to his temple was from blunt force trauma, and his wrists were cut by the wire as he struggled. The blood on the knife was his, but the cut marks on the wire were consistent with Grace's statement that she was using it to free him. Annie had to be closely monitored due to her heart condition and the unknown substance she had been injected with. Before these results could be made public, the rumors had already taken on a life of their own. Grace's school suspended her scholarship application, stating they had to wait for the official police report. A classmate cornered Lily in the hallway. An adopted kid trying to rob her own dad. Figures. No roots, no morals. Lily grabbed the boy by his shirt collar, but a teacher intervened. "You can say whatever you want about me," Lily seethed, "but you mention my dad one more time. And I promise you, I won't hold back." Even in the hospital, Annie found no peace. Someone sent her a message asking if John was controlling her with drugs. She read it, turned her phone face down, and pulled the blanket over her head. "I brought her some soup." She turned to face the wall. "I'm not hungry." I set the container down. As I was about to leave, she asked, "Sarah, out there, do people think my dad is a bad person?" "They've got it wrong," I said. "The truth will come out." She started to cry. Then why couldn't they wait for the truth before they started talking? I couldn't answer her. I myself had spoken before I understood the whole story of her family. That's when Dr. Richard Crane appeared online. He sat in a polished office, in front of a wall of plaques, and spoke in a slow, measured voice. "I was in charge of the Havenwood Birthing Center on the night of the hurricane. Mr. John Peterson removed 3 newborn infants from the facility before the proper discharge procedures were completed. Most of our records were lost in the ensuing chaos. When a reporter asked if John had kidnapped the children, he didn't answer directly. I trust the authorities will conduct a thorough review. Those who have done nothing wrong have nothing to fear." His statement was like throwing a lit match on a pile of dry leaves. That afternoon, the 3 sisters stood around their father's hospital bed. John was awake, his head and wrists wrapped in white bandages. Grace's voice was trembling but clear. "Dad, did you take us from the birthing center without permission?" Lily turned on her. "You believe that guy?" "I'm asking Dad." Annie, in the adjacent bed, also looked over. Her eyes held no accusation, only a fear of the answer. John was silent for a long time. "I got you girls out of the floodwater. After that, I called for an ambulance, notified the police, and handed you over to the hospital staff. I never, ever hid you from the law." Grace pressed him. "Do you have any papers to prove that?" "The originals are in the old files. All I have are faded copies." Lily squeezed her father's hand. "I believe you, Dad." Grace looked down. "I want to believe you too. But right now, what people want isn't what we believe. It's what we can prove." John turned to face the window, his voice barely a whisper. "I'm not afraid of strangers not believing me. I'm just afraid of looking into your eyes and seeing that you don't believe me either." I stood outside the door, my throat tight. My testimony wasn't enough. John's memory wasn't enough. To restore the honor of that family, we had to find someone who was there on the night of the hurricane and find the records that had been gathering dust for 15 years. I suddenly remembered the ambulance driver. I didn't recall his name, only that he had a long scar on his right hand, and before he drove off that night, he'd stopped at my diner to buy a bottle of water and had written his phone number in an old blue notebook my husband used to keep. I rushed home and tore through the wooden cabinet where my husband kept his old records. In the 8 years since he'd passed, I still hadn't had the heart to throw away anything with his handwriting on it. Invoices for supplies, phone numbers for delivery drivers, lists of customers who owed a few dollars, all bundled with decaying rubber bands. After nearly an hour of searching, I found the blue notebook. The pages were yellowed, many numbers smeared. In the corner of one page, my husband had scrawled, "Frank Miller, county ambulance driver, scar on hand. Drinks his tea unsweetened." I tried the number. It was disconnected. The next morning, I took the notebook to Detective Miller. I also uninstalled the entire DVR from my diner's security system, without editing a single clip. The detective accepted them and reminded me, "Miss Jenkins, remember, whether the data is helpful or not, it must be left untouched. Evidence that has been edited by multiple people loses its value." I nodded. I had already made a mistake by speaking without knowing the facts. This time, I wouldn't add or remove a single second. After extracting the security footage, the police found that on the night of the incident, a scooter had passed by the end of the alley 3 times. The driver, wearing a helmet that concealed their face, had paused near John's shop before moving on. At around 8:40 p.m., John left the house. Less than 10 minutes later, Martha Gable appeared in her dark raincoat. The camera couldn't see inside the house, but a microphone mounted under the eaves of my diner had picked up some of the sounds that carried across the driveway. There was the sound of a heavy impact, Lily's scream, and, most clearly, Grace's voice saying, "Dad, hold still. I'm cutting the wire." The audio wasn't enough to tell the whole story of the struggle, but it supported the fact that she was holding the knife to free her father, not to attack him. Detective Miller had the data officially logged as evidence. "This is just one piece," he said. "To clarify what happened in 2011, we still need to find the original intake records and witnesses." I gave him the old notebook with the ambulance driver's name, Frank Miller. I only have his old number and the detail about the scar on his right hand. With that small piece of information, I started asking around among people who used to work at the county hospital. Some said Frank had retired. Others thought he'd moved to be with his wife's family. One person remembered his full name but didn't have an address. I went to the old ambulance depot. An elderly? An elder Fang. An elderly of look teaser. He was meticulous. He was meticulous of John. I showed him and thought for a moment. Frank. He used to log every single trip in a personal notebook. He was meticulous. Even wrote down how many gallons of gas he used. Do you know where he is now? Heard he moved out to Bingtu Parish to start a farm. You should ask old Min, the ambulance mechanic. They were close. I drove another 20 miles before I found Mr. Min. He gave me the address to a small house at the end of a concrete lane, with 2 rows of palm trees out front. Frank Miller was 66, his hair mostly gray. He was thin, but the long scar running from his right wrist to his thumb was unmistakable. The moment I saw it, I knew I'd found the right person. I asked him, "Sir, do you remember the night of the hurricane in 2011? You transported 3 baby girls from the Havenwood Birthing Center to the hospital." Frank, who had been watering his garden, paused. "The 3 of them all in the same ambulance?" My voice caught. "Yes, those 3 babies are 15 years old now." He invited me inside. After I explained how John's family was being falsely accused, he stood up, opened a dusty trunk under an old family altar, and pulled out several notebooks. His wife grumbled, "Why do you keep all that old junk? It just clutters up the house." Frank blew the dust off a cover. "You see? Sometimes old paper can save a living person." He flipped through the pages, stopping at the entry for the 18th of November 2011. The ink was faded, but it was still legible. 12:40 a.m. Received 3 female newborns at Havenwood Birthing Center, discovered by John Peterson. Transported to county hospital. Attending nurse and sheriff's deputy present as witnesses. Next to it was an intake number. I reached out and touched the page, my eyes stinging. "Are you absolutely sure the man who saved them was John Peterson?" Frank looked at me. "I may be old, but I'm not senile. That night, that man kept telling me to drive faster. Every time the ambulance hit a bump, he'd use one hand to steady the oxygen tank and the other to shield the baby's blankets. A man who wants to kidnap children doesn't call both an ambulance and the police to watch him do it." Detective Miller came to take his official statement and sealed a copy of the notebook. Using the intake number Frank had recorded, the investigators tracked down the neonatal unit's logbook from that night. They determined that a batch of files had been moved to an old storage warehouse after the hospital was renovated. The warehouse was behind the main administrative building and rarely accessed. The files were bundled in twine, covered in dust, and some had been chewed by termites. It took them nearly 2 days, but they finally found a copy of the intake report for the 3 newborns. The document clearly stated that John Peterson was the individual who discovered the infants in a flooded area, assisted in their transport to the hospital, and transferred them to the care of medical staff in the presence of a law enforcement officer. There was nothing in the report to suggest he had taken the children without authorization or concealed their whereabouts. When Detective Miller read the verified findings at the hospital, Grace turned away to hide her tears. Lily grabbed her father's hand and said loud enough for the whole room to hear, "I told you. My dad didn't kidnap anyone." John didn't look triumphant. He just asked, Is this paper enough to get Grace's scholarship back and let my girls go to school in peace? Grace's voice was thick with emotion. Dad, you were just proven innocent. Why are you only asking about us? He gave a tired smile. I'm old. A few words from strangers don't hurt me. You girls have your whole lives ahead of you. But the intake report only cleared John of the kidnapping accusation. It didn't explain why the girls' records had been altered. The 3 hospital bracelets from the strongbox were sent for forensic analysis. Underneath the ink showing 3 different mothers' names, experts found evidence of erasure and older, faded writing. The 3 nursing charts were filled out within minutes of each other, in the same handwriting, with the same pen. The staff member listed on each was Martha Gable. The supervising physician was Dr. Richard Crane. The carbon paper with PA 27, PA 28, and PA 29 was also not something John had written. It was part of an internal form from the birthing center. From Martha Gable's phone, investigators recovered deleted call logs. In the 2 months before the break-in, she had met with Dr. Crane multiple times at a coffee shop. She had also received calls from the longtime driver of Eleanor Clark. At the time, that name meant nothing to me. But to John, the name Dr. Crane was what made him clench his newly unbandaged fists. He didn't just lie about me taking the kids, John said. He's afraid of people finding out where those 3 girls really came from. Dr. Crane maintained his composure. He claimed the discrepancies on the bracelets were simply mistakes made during a chaotic power outage. His meetings with Martha were innocent. She was just a former employee checking in. Then, he quietly made a call to a woman who had left the nursing profession years ago. Her name was Nurse Davis, and she had been present during the birth of the 3 girls. Dr. Crane suggested they meet privately. Nurse Davis refused. 2 days later, she walked into the police station on her own. She was carrying an old cloth bag. Inside was a diary, a few letters, and a small audio recorder that had belonged to a woman who was now deceased. She placed it all on the table, her eyes red. I've been silent for 15 years, she said. Whatever punishment I face now, I have to tell those 3 girls the truth. Their mother never abandoned them. Nurse Davis sat before Detective Miller for nearly 10 minutes before she could bring herself to open the diary. Her hands gripped the cover as if afraid that letting go would unleash 15 years of buried secrets. I was asked to be there because my name was mentioned in one of the letters. John and the 3 girls were there as well. Annie was still pale from the injection. Grace sat close to her, while Lily stared at Nurse Davis without blinking. Ma'am, Detective Miller said gently, just tell us what you know firsthand. If it's something you only heard, please specify. She nodded, her voice hoarse. That year, I was a nursing assistant at the Havenwood Birthing Center. The woman who gave birth to the 3 girls was named Laura Hayes. She explained that Laura had been admitted at 24 years old. The labor was long and difficult, but all 3 babies survived. The youngest was underweight and had a birthmark on her back, near her left shoulder blade. Annie gasped, tears welling in her eyes. That's me. Nurse Davis looked at her, her own tears overflowing. Yes, I was the one who carried you to the warming table. You had the weakest cry, but you gripped my finger so tightly. After the birth, Laura was sedated due to exhaustion. When she woke up, she kept asking for her babies. Dr. Crane told her all 3 were premature and hadn't survived. Grace's voice trembled. Did my mother get to see us? No. She begged to see you, begged for even a piece of your blanket, but they refused. Lily gritted her teeth. And you just stood there and watched? Nurse Davis didn't look away. I stood there. I heard your mother crying. I knew you were all alive. But I was afraid of losing my job. Afraid of what Dr. Crane would do to me. I even signed a false report. Lily jumped to her feet. Then you're no better than them. John said her name softly. Lily? Let her speak, Dad. Everyone says they were afraid, but the one who suffered the most was our mother. Nurse Davis bowed her head. You're right. Being silent isn't always the noble thing to do. Sometimes, people are silent out of cowardice, and that's when evil gets the chance to grow. After the hurricane, Nurse Davis quit her job and moved away, working at a pharmacy in another county. But every night, she was haunted by the memory of Laura Hayes pounding on the nursery door, crying for her children. In 2019, she read a local newspaper article about a single mechanic raising 3 girls of the same age. The adoption date and the circumstances of their discovery made her suspicious, so she sought out Laura. By then, Laura was much thinner, working at a small garment factory, and she still had the small cloth she'd embroidered with 3 flowers. When she heard her daughters might be alive, she didn't cry. She just asked, "Are the 3 of them... are they together?" "I think so. They're still together." Laura covered her face. "Then God has still left me a reason to breathe." In September of 2020, Laura Hayes came to our neighborhood. That day, John had taken Annie to a specialist in New Orleans, and Grace and Lily were at school. I was the one who met her in front of my diner. I remember how thin she was, how she clutched a cloth bag to her chest, and how she asked in a small voice, "Excuse me, ma'am, does the family next door happen to be raising 3 girls of the same age?" At the time, there had been reports of a stranger following school children in the area. I looked at her anxious expression and became suspicious. "Who are you to them?" I know about the year they were born." That one vague sentence made me put up a wall. I told her the Peterson family had moved away and even stood in the alley to block her from going any further. She stared at the house next door for a long time. "Are you sure they moved?" "I'm sure," I said. "Please don't ask any more questions." As this was being recounted, my throat closed up. I couldn't look at the 3 girls. Nurse Davis continued. After leaving our neighborhood, Laura received a call from an unknown man. He threatened that if she tried to contact the girls again, she would be reported for harassing minors and attempting to destroy a family. Laura was terrified of bringing scandal upon her daughters, and her health began to decline. But she kept writing letters. In early 2021, one of those letters arrived at John's house. John, sitting quietly until now, spoke. I received it. All 3 girls turned to him. "You read it?" Grace asked. "I read it." "What did she say?" "She said she might be your biological mother and asked to meet you just once." "And?" "That same week, I received an envelope with pictures of you girls in front of your school. The sender warned that if I replied to the letter, one of you would get hurt." Lily's voice was choked. "So what did you do?" "I hid the letter. I thought your mother might have been used as bait. I wanted to investigate and make sure it was safe before I told you." Grace looked at him. "But you didn't call the police. And you didn't tell us." John bowed his head. "I was wrong." Those 2 words were quiet, but they filled the room with a heavy weight. Nurse Davis turned on the small audio recorder. A woman's weak, halting voice filled the room. "If my children are still alive, I only pray that the 3 of them are still together. I'm not asking you to forgive me for being late. I just want you to know, there has never been a day when I believed the sound of your cries had truly gone silent." Annie buried her face in Grace's shoulder. Lily turned away, but I could see her shoulders shaking. Laura Hayes passed away in May of 2022 after a long illness. Before she died, she gave the diary, letters, and recording to Nurse Davis, instructing her to only share them when there was enough evidence to ensure her daughters wouldn't be hurt again. I stood up, my legs barely supporting me. "I was the one who turned your mother away." Lily looked at me, her eyes like ice. "You didn't kill our mother. But you closed the last door in her face when she still had the strength to stand in front of it." I had no defense. I thought I was protecting them. In reality, I had made my own fear the truth and made a decision that belonged to 4 other people. Grace turned to her father. "And you, Dad, you got the letter. You can't say you didn't know." John nodded, a tear falling onto his calloused hands. "I'm not asking you to understand my reasons. I'm just asking to be held accountable for my mistake." Nurse Davis pushed the diary toward Detective Miller. Among the pages about the 3 children she never got to hold, Laura had mentioned one man several times. On the last page, a single line was underlined twice. "Your father's name is Daniel Clark. He promised he would come back for us." For the first time in 15 years, the 3 girls learned the name of the man who gave them their DNA. But not a single one of them called him Dad. Daniel Clark arrived at the police station on a late December morning. I wasn't present for his first interview. What happened behind that closed door was pieced together for me later by John, the girls, and by Susan, Daniel Clark's wife. Mr. Clark was 45, tall and well-dressed. He owned a regional trucking company, not massive, but stable and successful. Looking at him, You would never guess he was connected to 3 children nearly lost in a hurricane. When Detective Miller placed Laura Hayes' diary in front of him, he stared at the name on the cover for a long time. "Do you know a Laura Hayes?" He answered quietly, "Yes." "What was your relationship?" "We were in love." "Did you know she was pregnant with 3 children?" He clasped his hands together. "I knew she was pregnant. I didn't know it was triplets at the time." According to him, his mother, Eleanor Clark, had fiercely opposed their relationship. She felt Laura was poor, from the wrong kind of family, and would hold her son back. Shortly before Laura was due, Daniel's mother sent him to Florida to manage a new business venture. A few weeks later, Eleanor called to inform him that Laura had given birth prematurely and that all 3 babies had died. Detective Miller asked, "Did you see your children with your own eyes?" "No." "Did you see a death certificate? Any hospital records?" "No." "So you just believed it?" Daniel Clark bowed his head. "Because I wanted to believe it." The answer hung in the silent room. He admitted that he had grieved but eventually moved on with his work, got married, and had a son. Doubts would occasionally surface, but he always told himself his mother would never lie about something so monumental. When he was invited to meet the girls, he stood in the hallway for nearly 10 minutes before he could bring himself to enter the room. Grace sat between her 2 sisters. John sat across from them. No one stood up or offered a warm welcome. Daniel looked at each of their faces, his voice thick with emotion. "You 3 look so much like your mother." Lily's reply was instant and cold. "Don't talk like you watched us grow up." John gently reminded her, "Lily, let the man speak." "I'm listening, but I'm not going to let him walk in here and deliver some touching speech like he's in a movie." Daniel didn't get angry. He pulled a chair to a respectful distance. "I have no right to ask for your trust. I just want to cooperate to get to the bottom of this." Grace asked, "Did you know that your mother, Eleanor, paid money to the Havenwood Birthing Center?" He shook his head. "I didn't know then." "And later?" The question made him pause. "I saw some unclear financial records later, but I didn't understand what they were." Lily gave a cold laugh. "Didn't understand or didn't want to understand?" Daniel didn't answer right away. Annie spoke up, her voice softer than her sister's. "Does anyone on your side of the family have a history of heart disease?" He looked at her, his expression changing instantly. "My maternal grandfather died young from a heart attack. And one of my aunts has been treated for arrhythmia." Annie clasped her hands. "So that information could help my doctors. I will provide you with our entire family's medical history." Lily turned to her sister. "You're asking about your health. That doesn't mean you have to accept him." Annie's eyes welled up. "I know, but my body can't afford to ignore important information just because I'm angry." Grace put a hand on her sister's shoulder and then looked at Daniel. "We agree to a DNA test. Not to choose a new father, but to know the truth." The test was conducted with the consent of the girls and John, as their legal guardian. The samples were sealed and sent for analysis. During the days they waited for the results, John barely slept. He still cooked their meals, reminded them to take their medication, and drove Grace to her study groups. But sometimes, in the middle of a repair, he would just stop and stare at the house. "Are you afraid the results won't be a match?" I asked him. He shook his head. "I'm afraid they will be. If they are, the girls will know their origins. You'll still be their father." "My head knows that," he said. "But the heart isn't a machine where you can just swap out a broken part." I didn't know how to comfort him. Blood is thicker than water. That's a natural truth. But 15 years of meals, fevers, and sleepless nights, that wasn't something you could just set aside either. The final results confirmed that Daniel Clark was the biological father of all 3 girls, and that Grace, Lily, and Annie were, in fact, identical triplets. Grace read the paper twice, then folded it neatly. Annie sat in silence. Lily didn't even touch the report. Detective Miller was clear. "This DNA result does not automatically terminate the legal adoptive relationship, Mr. Clark has no right to remove the children from their home or interfere in their lives." Lily looked straight at Daniel. "Did you hear that?" He nodded. "I heard." After the meeting, Daniel offered his support. He said to Grace, "I can cover your tuition and any other expenses for a good college." She replied, "I'm not accepting. I don't want the first thing between us to be about money." He turned to Lily. If you need legal help with the slander online, I don't need someone who just showed up to hire other people to manage my feelings. Finally, he looked at Annie. I want to take you to a specialist. I'll cover all the costs. Annie said, I will accept the family medical history. But where I get treatment is a decision for my dad, my doctor, and me to make. 3 offers, 3 different refusals. Daniel sighed. I know money can't make up for. Lily cut him off. You know that, but you still offer it first. Because it's the only thing you think you have to give. Don't think you can divide 15 years of irresponsibility into 3 neat envelopes. Susan, Daniel's wife, had been standing by the door the whole time. Only then did she step inside. She didn't blame Lily or try to defend her husband. She's right, Susan said. Money can pay for tuition and medical bills. It can't pay for the years their mother spent looking for them. Daniel turned to his wife. Susan. She looked her husband in the eye. If you want these girls to give you a chance, you have to tell them everything you've been hiding. The atmosphere in the room shifted. What else is he hiding? Grace asked. Daniel's face went pale. Susan explained that a few days earlier, while going through old papers with her husband, she found a financial statement showing a wire transfer from Eleanor Clark's account to the Havenwood Birthing Center. The statement was from 2011, but in the margin, in Daniel's own handwriting from 2018, was a note. You saw this 8 years ago, she said. You even wrote, ask Mom about this next to it. Grace held the DNA results tighter. Did you ask her? Daniel's voice was hoarse. No. Why? He looked at his 3 daughters, unable to avoid the truth any longer, because at that time, the company was borrowing money from my family. My life was stable. I was afraid that if I dug any deeper, everything would fall apart. Lily shot to her feet. Our mother was wandering around looking for her children, and you were afraid your life would fall apart? I'm sorry. You're not an ignorant man, Lily said, her voice shaking with rage. You're a man who saw a locked door and chose to turn your back on it. Daniel bowed his head, offering no defense. John sat silently, but I saw his knuckles turn white as he gripped his knees. The man who shared a bloodline with his 3 children had finally appeared. But instead of bringing peace, he had brought another unanswered question into the heart of their home. That night, Grace agreed to meet with Daniel again to pursue evidence. Lily declared she never wanted to see his face again. Annie only requested the family medical history. And John closed his bedroom door early. Through the crack, I saw him sitting on the edge of his bed, holding 3 old broken hair clips. For the first time, he understood that he was no longer afraid of a villain trying to steal his children. He was afraid that the truth itself would lead them to walk out of the home he had spent his entire life building. The dinner table that evening had all 4 of them, but no one was in their usual seat. Grace sat at the head of the table, a file of documents in front of her. Lily was turned halfway in her chair, facing her sister. Annie stirred her spoon in a bowl of cold soup. John sat in the middle, looking from his eldest to his middle child, like a man trying to balance a spinning plate without knowing where to put his hands. I'm meeting with Mr. Clark tomorrow, Grace announced. The fork in John's hand paused. For what? He knows about the money from 2011. I want to ask him more. Lily put her bowl down. He knew, and he stayed silent. You're going to ask him more just to hear him make excuses? Grace looked at her sister. I'm not meeting him to forgive him. If we want to bring Dr. Crane and Eleanor Clark to justice, we need to know what he saw, Annie whispered. I just want the medical history. Lily turned on her. You're defending him too? I'm not defending anyone. My heart is the problem. I need to know what diseases run in that family. Grace sighed. The 3 of us can't just shut our ears every time someone hurts us. Lily gave a bitter laugh. And your plan is to invite everyone who abandoned our mother and us over for tea? That's enough. John's voice cut through the tension, and the table fell silent. From now on, none of you are to meet with Daniel Clark alone. Anything you need, I will handle it through the police. Grace looked at her father. You just told us we had the right to choose. That was before I knew he saw proof and stayed silent. And that's exactly why I have to ask him. I said no. Grace was fighting for the truth. Lily was fighting from a place of anger. Annie was fighting for her health. And John was trapped in the middle, fighting his fear of losing all 3 of them. The next morning, John borrowed Grace's phone and deleted the text, confirming her meeting at the counseling office Susan had arranged. Grace only found out when Susan called, asking why she hadn't arrived. The girl walked straight into the garage. "You deleted my messages." John didn't look up from the engine he was working on. "I canceled the meeting. It's my phone, and you're my daughter. I may be only 15, but it's my life." He put his wrench down. "I've raised you for 15 years. I know who to trust better than you do." Grace's face paled. "You're using what you did for us to force us to obey you. Why shouldn't I? Because you're supposed to be protecting us. You saved us from people who tried to decide our fate for us. How can you turn around and do the exact same thing?" John shot to his feet. "Because I have given my entire life to you. I sold my land, I stayed up all night, I ran to the hospital, I let people laugh in my face. Now some man shows up with a piece of paper, and you all run to him to ask questions?" Lily came out, her eyes red. "She's wrong, Dad." Mr. Clark chose to be silent. "What is she even looking for?" "I'm looking for evidence." "You're not looking for evidence," Lily shot back. "You keep opening the door and letting him walk right in." Annie stood in the kitchen doorway, tears streaming down her face. "Please stop. I'm so tired." That afternoon, Susan insisted that Daniel meet the three girls at an office with a state-appointed advocate present. She told her husband directly, "If you want them to give you a chance, you have to tell them everything. Stop letting them drag the truth out of you piece by piece," followed by another apology. Grace placed a copy of the financial statement on the table. "You saw this wire transfer in 2018. What did you think?" Daniel looked at his own handwriting in the margin. "At the time, I suspected my mother had paid the birthing center." "Did you suspect it was related to our mother?" "Yes." Lily gave a humorless laugh. "And you didn't ask." "I asked her indirectly. My mother said it was an old payment for a medical treatment. I knew something was wrong, but the company was in the middle of a loan, and my family life was peaceful." Grace cut him off. "You were afraid the truth would shatter your life, weren't you?" Annie's voice was barely a whisper. "While you were afraid your home would be shattered, did you ever stop to think about how our mother was living?" Daniel couldn't answer. Annie stood up. "I need some air." Grace reached for her. "Annie, wait. I just need to breathe." Outside, in the harsh sunlight, Annie walked quickly toward a bus stop, a tightness growing in her chest. She sat down on a bench, and her vision began to blur. A street vendor saw her clutching her chest and called 911. When I arrived at the hospital with John, Daniel was already there, standing in the hallway. John ran straight to the nurse's station. "She's allergic to this type of antibiotic. She had a tachycardia episode back in August. Her medication is in a blue cloth bag. She hasn't eaten lunch. Please check her blood sugar." Daniel stood a few feet away, empty-handed. He knew Annie carried his blood, but he didn't know if she was afraid of needles or what kind of medicine she took before bed. The doctors said Annie had suffered an arrhythmia episode brought on by stress and exhaustion. They had gotten her there just in time. When she woke up, the first person she called for was still Dad. John leaned over and took her hand. "I'm here." Daniel watched them, and then quietly stepped out of the room. He told me later, "Biology gives me responsibility, but it doesn't give me the right to step into a place someone else spent a lifetime earning." He stopped offering to take Annie anywhere. He sent her medical history to her treating physician, and only came when the family agreed to it. That night, the four of them sat in the hospital room, too exhausted to argue. "Dad," Grace said, "I'm looking for the truth, not for a way out of this house." Lily looked down. "I was just afraid that if my sisters opened their hearts to him, you would become an afterthought." Annie squeezed her father's hand. "I need to know where I came from, but the place I want to come home to is still here." John looked at his three daughters for a long time before finally saying what he feared most. "I'm not just afraid of bad people hurting you. I'm afraid that one day, when you know everything, you'll realize you don't need me anymore." Grace started to cry. "Gratitude isn't a lock you can hang on our lives, Dad. But 15 years of love isn't something one DNA test can erase." John bowed his head. For the first time, he understood that he couldn't keep his family together by adding more locks to the doors. A home doesn't exist because the people inside are forbidden to leave. It exists because after seeing the world outside, they still want to come back. Eleanor Clark appeared one morning in early March, after a rare off-season rain had washed the streets of Havenwood. She stepped out of a car wearing a silk dress. her hair pulled back in a neat bun. Looking at her calm demeanor, no one would have guessed the 70-year-old woman was connected to the separation of 3 infants from their mother. I was arranging produce outside my store when she stopped. "Are you Sarah Jenkins?" "Yes. Can I help you?" "I'm here to see the Peterson family. I'm Daniel Clark's mother." I pointed to the house next door, but didn't invite her in. After everything that had happened, I no longer dared to insert myself into other people's business in the name of being a neighbor. John opened the door. Grace, Lily, and Annie stood behind him. "You 3 look just like Daniel did when he was young," Eleanor said. Lily's voice was cold. "If you're looking for Daniel, you're at the wrong house." Eleanor took a seat on the porch swing. "Your mother was poor. How could she have raised 3 children on her own? Daniel was young, with his whole future ahead of him. I just wanted to find better, more affluent families for you." Grace stepped forward. "By telling our mother that her 3 children were dead? I never told the doctor to go that far. But you paid him. You paid him to handle it discreetly." Lily laughed. "Stealing someone's children and calling it a discreet solution. People with money really do have a way of making everything sound clean." John asked, "Did you come here to apologize or to make excuses?" Eleanor looked at him. "You saw the irregularities in the files, yet you still adopted all 3 of them and kept them for 15 years. You're not entirely blameless in this." Grace stepped in front of her father. "My dad handed us over to the hospital and adopted us through legal channels. Don't you dare try to twist the rescuer into a culprit." Eleanor stood up. "The authorities will be the judge of that." 3 days later, she filed a petition demanding a review of the adoption records. Articles began appearing online, insinuating that John had known about the children's origins and had deliberately kept them, exploiting legal loopholes and concealing the truth to win their affection. They weren't accusing him of kidnapping anymore. They were accusing him of emotional theft. Lily was so furious she threw her phone across the room. "She can't win us over, so she's trying to drag Dad through the mud with her." Grace said, "She's trying to exhaust us, so we'll give up the strongbox and Nurse Davis's testimony." She was right. Nurse Davis received an invitation to meet at a coffee shop. When she arrived, Eleanor Clark was waiting with a thick envelope. Nurse Davis later told me that Eleanor pushed the envelope across the table. "All you have to do is say you misremembered. The false signature on the old document will be overlooked." Nurse Davis didn't touch the money. "If I retract my statement, those 3 girls will have to live their entire lives with a lie. Dr. Crane will be cornered and will testify that you conspired with him to forge the records. If I made a mistake, I'll face the consequences. But I won't take more money to make another mistake. If you speak out, you'll tear multiple families apart." Nurse Davis stood up. "Their family was torn apart the day you took those children from their mother. The sound of it breaking is just now reaching your ears." Meanwhile, John received 2 more threatening letters. One mentioned Grace's school by name. The other listed the exact date of Annie's next doctor's appointment. One night, I smelled burning paper coming from his backyard. I ran over and saw him sitting in front of a metal basin, holding a stack of old letters. Grace rushed out and snatched them from his hand. "Dad, what are you doing?" "Burning it all. If these are gone, they'll leave you alone." "They're doing this because they're afraid of the truth, not because of a few pieces of paper. I just want it to stop." Grace held the letters to her chest. "You taught us to stand tall and not be afraid. Now you want to burn the very thing that proves you stood tall?" John yelled. "I don't need to prove anything anymore. I need the 3 of you to be safe." Grace started to cry. "Being safe by letting the bad people win isn't peace, Dad. It's surrender." I didn't say a word. I just put out the smoldering embers and gathered the unburned fragments, placing them on the table. The next morning, I handed over all my security footage to Detective Miller, including the clip of me gossiping with Brenda. He asked, "You know this clip proves you contributed to spreading the rumors, right?" "I know," I said. "I've hidden my shame once already. I can't let someone else lose their evidence because of it." From the clarified audio, investigators were able to isolate a key phrase from Martha Gable during the struggle. "After tonight, no one will be able to connect those 3 codes." This matched her deleted text messages and her meeting schedule with Dr. Crane. At the same time, Susan Clark demanded that her husband check an old safe belonging to his mother at the company office. He hesitated. "That's my mother's personal property." Susan replied, Those 3 girls were once their mother's personal life. Your mother stepped into it and made decisions for everyone. Inside the safe was a red financial ledger. Tucked between entries for agricultural purchases were records of cash transfers to the Havenwood Birthing Center, Dr. Crane and Martha Gable, dated shortly after Laura Hayes gave birth. Another entry was dated October 2026, with the note "Handle old files" written next to it. Daniel took the ledger home to confront his mother. Eleanor's face went pale. "You went through my safe? I'm asking you one last time, Mom. What was this money for? I did everything to secure your future. You secured my future by burying the future of a mother and her 3 children?" She grabbed his hand. "If you had married Laura back then, you wouldn't have this company. You wouldn't have the life you have today." Daniel pulled his hand away. "So the life I have today was built on the cries of 3 babies? And you expect me to be grateful for that? Daniel, if you hand over that ledger, I'll lose all my standing in this community." "Your standing wasn't lost when the truth came out, Mom. It was lost the day you used money to do what you did." That afternoon, Daniel Clark gave the ledger to the police and admitted he had seen signs of wrongdoing, but had chosen to remain silent. News that the ledger had been confiscated quickly reached Martha Gable. In her jail cell, she grilled her lawyer. What did Dr. Crane say? Did Eleanor admit to giving him money? When she learned that both of them claimed she had acted alone out of personal greed, she sat back and gave a dry, empty laugh. "They want me to take the fall for everything, don't they?" For the first time, the woman who had used half-truths to deceive Annie realized she was just a pawn in their game. And when the game was about to be lost, the first pawn to be sacrificed is always the weakest. After 3 sleepless nights, Martha Gable changed her story. Her lawyer made it clear that cooperating wouldn't erase her crimes. She would still be held responsible for the break-in and assault. But if she continued to take the fall for others, she would not only serve time for her own actions, but would also allow the 2 people who orchestrated everything to walk away. She sat before Detective Miller, her hands clasped tightly. "I'll talk, but I want my statement recorded in full. Everyone needs to be held accountable for their part." The detective replied, "The law doesn't assign responsibility based on what you want. You tell the truth, and the evidence will decide." Martha started with the birth of Laura Hayes' daughters. She explained that Eleanor Clark had approached Dr. Crane, offering him money to ensure the 3 babies would not become an obstacle in her son's life. She wanted the mother to believe her children were dead, and for the infants to be sent far away. But Dr. Crane saw a different opportunity. He realized 3 healthy newborns could be placed with 3 separate, desperate, wealthy, childless families for a much larger profit. So, he forced Martha to alter the hospital bracelets, separate the 3 sequential patient files into 3 unrelated cases, and create 3 sets of fake records. "Did you know why he wanted the files separated?" the detective asked. Martha bowed her head. "At first, I just knew we had to hide them from the mother. Later, I realized Dr. Crane planned to sell them to 3 different families. And you went along with it. I had already taken the money. My signature was on the papers. I was afraid if I backed out, they would pin everything on me. You were afraid before anyone was even investigating, yet you kept signing more false documents." She broke down crying. "I was greedy first, and then I was scared. I have no more excuses." The hurricane ruined their plan. John Peterson got the babies out of the flooded room, called an ambulance, and insisted the police be present. Once the infants were officially admitted to the county hospital, Dr. Crane couldn't make them disappear. He declared them abandoned and tried to destroy the original records. The carbon paper with the 3 codes was accidentally left in the stack of papers that went with the children to the hospital. John later received it as part of their remaining medical file and kept it, not understanding its full significance. Martha continued. In 2018, Dr. Crane learned that John still had the old papers and began sending anonymous threats. Did Eleanor Clark know about this? Yes. She didn't write the letters herself, but she knew about the plan to retrieve the evidence. By 2026, when Annie started asking questions about her medical history and the sisters became suspicious, Dr. Crane panicked. Eleanor transferred money to an intermediary with the memo, "Handle old files." Martha was instructed to approach the most vulnerable daughter, find the location of the strongbox, and retrieve the carbon paper. Who made the fake roadside assistance call to John Peterson? Martha gave the name of a handyman who worked for Dr. Crane, Phone records and security footage later confirmed this man had purchased a burner phone called John and had been the one circling the neighborhood on the scooter. "Where did you get the drug you injected Annie with?" "Dr. Crane gave it to me. He said it was just a mild sedative." "You have medical training. You knew the girl had a heart condition. Why did you still inject her?" Martha covered her face with her hands. "In that moment, all I could think about was getting that paper. I knew it was dangerous, but I did it anyway." Each piece of her testimony was cross-verified. The syringe was analyzed, the wire transfers were traced, and parts of the deleted phone calls between Martha and Dr. Crane were recovered. The handyman confessed to being paid to lure John away from the house. The investigation clearly separated the crimes. The events of 2011 were reviewed based on the laws of that time. The 2026 incident was investigated as a separate conspiracy involving a staged emergency, home invasion, assault, illegal administration of a controlled substance, and destruction of evidence. Dr. Crane continued to deny everything, claiming Martha was lying to get a lighter sentence. But when presented with a recovered audio clip of a phone call, his own voice was clear. "Once you get the paper, burn it immediately. Don't let those 3 codes be seen together again." The doctor fell silent. The benevolent image he cultivated at charity events vanished. He asked his lawyer in a dry whisper, "Are they sure that's my voice?" Detective Miller replied, "The forensic analysis doesn't depend on your confirmation." Eleanor Clark could no longer claim she was just trying to give the girls a better future. The financial ledger, the intermediary's testimony, and her private meetings with Martha proved she was aware of the plan to retrieve the evidence. She tried to maintain her composure. "I never asked anyone to hurt someone." The detective responded, "Your level of culpability will be determined by the evidence. But funding an illegal plan and then claiming you didn't want the consequences doesn't make the money you paid innocent." The photos of Dr. Crane handing out charity awards were taken down from community centers. People who had once sung his praises fell silent. Eleanor Clark's business lost major partners, not because of rumors, but because her financial records were audited, and her reputation collapsed under the weight of the evidence. John Peterson received an official letter confirming that he had rescued, transferred, and adopted the 3 children according to all legal procedures. He had not participated in altering records, had not illegally detained the children, and had not engaged in any form of trafficking or concealment during the adoption process. The day he got the letter, he didn't read it to the whole neighborhood. He just placed it on the table in front of his 3 daughters. "I'm keeping this so that someday no one can point at you and say your father was a kidnapper." Grace hugged him tightly. Lily, through tears, said, "I want to make a copy and tape it to the front door of the shop." John stroked her hair. "You earn your honor back so you can live your life, not so you can stand on the porch and argue with the world forever." Grace's scholarship was reinstated. The school board rescinded its suspension and issued a formal apology for acting before the investigation was complete. The slanderous online posts were ordered to be taken down. Customers started returning to the auto shop. One man brought his car in and shuffled his feet. I heard what people were saying and I stayed away for a while. Hope you can forgive me." John knelt to check the man's tire. "You need your car fixed. I'll fix it. As for forgiveness, we'll let time work on that." Daniel Clark handed over his evidence and confessed his role of willful ignorance. He wasn't charged as a co-conspirator, but he had to step down from running his company for a time to deal with the legal and public fallout. He came to see the girls without gifts or envelopes. "What I am doing today is what I should have done years ago." Grace replied, "What you are doing today is right, but one right action doesn't erase years of choosing not to ask." Daniel nodded. "I understand." Lily faced Eleanor Clark at the final deposition. The older woman looked frail, her hair no longer perfectly coiffed. Lily said, "You were afraid our mother's poverty would make our lives difficult. In the end, the thing that caused this family the most suffering was your pride." Eleanor did not reply. Perhaps for the first time, she understood that money could buy silence for a while, but it could not buy the right to decide whose truth gets to survive. Late that August, the auto shop was open from sunrise. The sounds of engines, customers asking for quotes, and Lily complaining about the heat filled the air. Everything seemed to be back to normal, except for the locked room at the back of the house. The key was still in John's pocket, and the girls never mentioned it. But every time John walked past that door, he would pause for a few seconds. The truth was out in the open. But now, the person who had to open the final door wasn't the police or his daughters. It was the father who had once used that lock to keep his family from leaving. By early May, the long rainy season had given way to sunshine. In the mornings, light filtered through the bougainvillea vines over the garage, casting dancing patterns on the concrete. One afternoon, after closing the shop early, I was stacking crates when I heard John call out, "Grace, Lily, Annie, come in here with me." The back room had remained locked since the night of the break-in. It was an unspoken subject, as if everyone knew that behind that door lay not just papers, but John's fear and his daughter's doubt. He took the key from his pocket. The same hand that had expertly handled thousands of bolts and screws trembled as he put it in the lock. Lily crossed her arms, trying to lighten the mood. "If you're going to change your mind, Dad, speak now. The suspense is worse than waiting for exam results." He gave a sad smile. "I've kept this room locked for too long. It deserves to be opened slowly." The lock clicked. Inside was just a simple wooden desk, a filing cabinet, an old printer, and the metal strongbox, its hinge repaired. He placed the box on the desk and lifted the lid. Inside, the 3 newborn bracelets lay in a protective bag, next to the adoption papers, the copy of the intake report, the threatening letters, Laura's letter, and the notebook where he'd recorded strange license plates. He pushed it all toward his daughters. "From today on, these papers are no longer my secret. Whether you want to read them, keep copies, or give them to someone else is for you 3 to decide together." Grace asked, "Aren't you afraid that after we read them, we'll blame you again?" "Yes, I'm still afraid. But I understand now that my fear doesn't give me the right to blindfold you." Annie looked down at the yellowed letter. "You hid this to protect us, right?" John sat down. "At first it was. Later, I didn't know if I was hiding it for you or for myself. Every threatening letter made me add another lock. Every question you asked made me worry the truth would pull you away from home. I thought love meant holding on as tight as you can. But when you squeeze a hand too tight, the ones who get hurt are the ones you're holding." Grace sat down next to him. "I was looking for my origins, Dad, not for a new father. I know that now. I didn't before. I heard you with my ears, but in my heart I still thought that one day you would leave." He nodded. "Now I finally understand. A home isn't a cage. People stay because they want to, not because the door is locked." Lily turned away to wipe her eyes. "I told you Mr. Clark couldn't replace you, but you kept scaring yourself." Grace looked at her sister. "You're the one who didn't want me to meet with him," Lily admitted. "I was scared you and Annie would start to care about him. If our family got a real dad, people would start treating our dad like he was the old one." John pulled her closer. "I'm not an old appliance you can replace, and you girls are not my property." Annie rested her head on his shoulder. "The person I call Dad is still the one who remembers what medicine I'm allergic to, and that I can't have too much hot sauce on my chili." Lily managed to smile. "He also remembers I hide the burnt part of the casserole for myself." John laughed. "It's not hiding if everyone in the house knows you're doing it." Then, the 3 girls made their choices clear. Grace agreed to meet with Daniel occasionally to learn more about her mother and her family history. She still called him Mr. Clark. Annie accepted his offer to help with some of the costs for a specialist, on the condition that all treatment decisions would be made with her dad, John, and her doctors. Lily said she hadn't forgiven him. If he wanted to meet, he had to schedule it in advance, and was not to show up at her school or their home unannounced. John listened to it all and simply said, "I respect your decisions." A few days later, the 4 of them went to visit Laura's grave. I didn't go with them. That was a moment that belonged to them. When they returned, Annie told me that Grace had placed the diary by the headstone. Lily had cleared all the weeds, and she had played the final audio recording from her mother. In the recording, Laura didn't ask her daughters to seek revenge or choose between the man who raised them and the man who fathered them. She only begged that the 3 of them never be separated and that they not carry hatred as their baggage through life. John stood a little ways back. For the first time, he wasn't afraid of being replaced as his daughters said the word Mom. That afternoon, he removed the deadbolt from the back room door. He added a bookshelf, fixed up the long desk, and turned the space into a shared study room. "Are you really going to leave all the files here?" Lily asked. "Yep. I'm not afraid of you snooping anymore," he said. "Now I'm more afraid you'll be too lazy to read them." About a week later, Lily walked into my diner. She placed a box of homemade cookies on the counter. My dad wants to know if you'll come over for dinner tonight. I looked up. And you? I'm inviting you too, she said, trying to keep a straight face. But don't think one box of cookies erases everything. I know, I said. This is a debt I'll be paying in installments. With what? By minding my own business. She tried to hold her stern expression, but the corners of her mouth twitched into a smile. Dinner that night was simple. John's famous chili, cornbread, a green salad, and a chocolate cake. Daniel wasn't there. His wife, Susan, had just dropped off some fruit. Closeness cannot be forced. Sitting with the four of them, I listened to Lily argue with Annie over the last piece of cornbread, Grace remind her dad not to drink too much coffee at night, and John grumble about textbooks taking over his new study. The sounds carried through the thin wall that had once separated our two homes, and I understood that peace isn't the absence of cracks. Peace is when, after everything has been broken, people are still patient enough to piece it back together, without trying to hide the seams under a coat of fresh paint. That story taught me a profound lesson. Good intentions without wisdom can wound the very people you want to protect. A parent's love for a child should not be a claim of ownership, because children need not just love, but guidance and the respect to make their own choices. Blood gives us our roots, but responsibility, care, and devotion are what build a home.